the last 3.5 decades, well-known producer and Vedic scholar Michael Sternfeld has emerged as the bridge between all things Ramayana and the rest of the world. A passionate devotee of Ram who breaks into chants of Ram effortlessly, Sternfeld has produced his Ramayana magnum opus in the form of a 75-hour-long audio rendering of the great epic that took him 7 years to produce. Titled The Ramayan of Valmiki, it is possibly the longest audiobook of its kind in the world. He has followed that up with 3 distilled spin offs in the form of Ram's Dharma, Hanuman's leap of faith, and Sita's gems. For someone so immersed in the Ramayana for so long, Michael speaks with the enthusiasm of someone who has just discovered its profound value. An MA in Vedic Psychology from Maharishi International University, he has had a distinguished career as a producer, having created more than 400 productions for the David Lynch Foundation involving Paul McCartney, Ringo, Eddie Vedder, Sheryl Crowe, Jerry Seinfeld, Moby, Ben Folds, and the Beach Boys, as well as other productions with Jim Carrey, Marianne Williamson, and Donovan. Michael spoke to MCR. Welcome to Mayank Reports, Michael. It's a great pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much, Mayank. It's really a pleasure to be here and to share our background in Chicago.
You know, it's interesting that you and I are going to talk about the Ramayana, something that has been your long-time passion. Let me begin with the beginning. When was your first brush with the Ramayana?
Yeah, I know. You're right. It's gone back quite some time. It's 34 years now. I keep saying 33 years because it sounds good, but 34 years. Since I was young, I loved epic myths, epic adventures, from Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, especially, and the Odyssey from Greek mythology. So I loved epic myths. And I remember when Peter Brook, the famous English playwright, came out with the Mahabharata, right, which was an extraordinary, originally a worldwide tour of theater. It was a 9-hour theatrical production, and then later made into a trilogy movie. Really profound. I know some people had issues with it because he did a worldwide cast. I loved it. It was so powerful. I thought bringing this world stage and world performers together for the Mahabharata, which was a world war, ultimately. At that time, I was taking my master's degree in Vedic science at Maharishi International University here in Fairfield, founded by Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who's been my lifelong teacher. And at that time, I was going deep into that knowledge. And at the end of that program, which was 1989 for me, parallel to that, I'm probably giving you a longer answer than you wanted. That's when Ramanand Sagar came out with a video series in India. And I thought to myself, at the end of my program, Maharishi asked my class, we had an excellent, deep class, said, what would you please write me a 1-page statement of what you would like to do with this precious knowledge of the Vedic knowledge that you've soaked in your master's program. And I wrote back that I wanted to work under his guidance to create productions of the Ramayana. And the only reason I didn't choose Mahabharata, which I actually liked even more at that time because I thought it was more modern and more dramatic, was it was already taken by Peter Brook. He had already done it.
Right.
So that's what started it, just that feeling. And even though I didn't get immediately direct feedback from Maharishi on this, it was like literally since then, 1991, I've been on the Ramayana trail all this time, doing various productions of the Ramayana. And I can go into some of those in a second, but at least I want to give you my answer there for starters.
I'm curious to know, when you first started reading it, which particular translation did you go for? I think you mentioned on your website the one by the Indian journalist N. Raghunathan.
Right.
Is that the one you started reading, or that was another one?
No, but this is a really good story. You're going to really like this as a journalist. At that time, I had a severe visual problem which was affecting my reading ability. so I was unable to, I mean, I was kind of reading short abridgments and so on, but I really wanted to get it down into you can't really abridge Vedic literature if you're a purist, because the richness is in the detail of it and the flow and the sequence. And the reason why I said that, even though I had put out this desire to work with the Ramayana, the first opportunity did not come until 1993, when I got a call basically from Maharishi was stationed in Vlodrop to do a production with all the children at the Maharishi school here in Fairfield, because there's not only a university, but there's also a lower and middle school, Maharishi school. And the only criteria was that I had to use all the children. Well, it so happens there was 600 children in the school at the time. It's a little smaller now. And I decided this was more like a halftime show at the Olympic, or the opening Olympic ceremony. And I did this production. It ended up being about 400 of the children. At that time, I could not read the unabridged text, which of course wasn't really necessary. The way I did my research, which was appropriate for the children at the time, those 12 comic book series from India? Right. I forgot the name of it. They're really quite good. That was my initial research on the Ramayana. I was reading comic.
Interesting, yeah.
And then I realized, I felt the limitation, the frustration, because I couldn't, it was so long. The Ramayana is so long. It's the second longest book in the world after Mahabharata.
Right.
I decided, you know what? I have to have someone read it to me. And who am I going to get to read this to me? And then I said, as long as I'm going to have someone read it to me, I should record it. And as long as I'm going to take the time to record it, I might as well do it to professional standards, because I have a background as a producer. This thing snowballed out of my visual impairment.
I see.
And I ended up spending 7 years, from 1997 to 2003. I never thought it would take that long. I'll explain why it took so long in a moment, but recording the complete unabridged Ramayana of Valmiki. And it took 7 years because it's incredibly long. It's a fully dramatized production of the Ramayana. And you're right, I did a lot of research to find out what's the best translation. And the one that I found was by N. Raghunathan from India, who was a journalist. And his so many of the English translations, the abridged and unabridged, Gita Press is kind of well known as the read version. The English language is very clunky. It's just awkward. Right. Raghunathan was a journalist and also a scholar, did an absolutely beautiful job.
So, I'm trying to get a handle on this. When you say you decided to make it into an audio version of that, now when somebody reads it, are you reading the actual text by Raghunathan, or somebody rewrote it for dramatic effect?
The original unabridged English translation by Raghunathan, all of it.
Okay.
I mean, complete, meaning that's why it's 75 hours long. It's the world's longest audiobook. I mean, I haven't gotten the Guinness Book of World Records because I haven't taken the time to do so, but it should be. There's some other audiobooks, but they're they combine the Old and the New Testament. That's longer. If you combine Old and New Testament, it's longer. That's the full Bible. But if you just compare it to the Old or the New Testament, it's the longest audiobook as far as I can tell. And these days, in the early years, it was released on cassette. All unabridged audiobooks were released on cassette in 2000. It was released in 3 volumes, 1997, 2001, 2004. Each contained several of the khandas, or books of the Ramayana. And it won the National Endowment for the Humanities Iowa Outstanding Project of the Year. It got a lot of press, a lot of publicity. It was 3 binders with over 50 100-minute cassettes. It weighed 6 pounds of cassettes. Now it's completely been digitally remastered. Oh, I finished it in 2004. Finally done. This took so long, 7 years. And by that time, cassettes were obsolete. So I had to go back, digitally remaster the whole thing, which took another year. And now it's available as a digital download, because people don't even listen to it on CDs or DVD, anymore.
So describe to me, did you enlist actors to intone the text, or
Yes.
Is it like a dramatic? I mean, I heard a little bit, not a lot, but I can see that it is a performance.
Right. There's 2 kinds of, like what the BBC does is called radio theater, where they have multiple actors And usually they have a beautiful version of Lord of the Rings, but it's done with multiple actors, and it's usually an abridgment because it would be too long. Usually unabridged audiobooks from some of the great books are done by one actor doing all the different voices. And some of those voice actors are brilliant. So for this production, I directed it and produced and directed it, but volume 1 had one reader doing all the voices. Volume 2 had a different reader that was including, volume 1 was Bala and Ayodhya Kanda. Volume 2 was Aranyaka and Sundarakanda. Hold a second, I'm missing one of them. Volume 3 was Yuddhakanda and Uttarakanda.
I see.
Now I got tired of working with voice talent, which can be challenging because we weren't in the studio for a few weeks. We were in the studio for a year on each volume. And then I had to raise the money to produce the next. And the third, I decided to go on the other side of the microphone. My reading ability had improved by this point, and I do the voice of volume 3 for Yuddha and Uttarakanda, and I do about 150 different character voices myself.
I heard some of that, yes.
Yeah.
No, but this sounds exhausting.
I'm a good producer. I've done 400 productions in my life in theater, music, dance, audio production, video production. I know how to produce. This project was the most challenging of all time for me.
Right.
That's why it took 7 years. Lots of interruptions, lots of karma, lots of challenges. But look, the Ramayana is filled with extraordinary challenges.
Yeah.
It's not all a walk through the daisies, as you well know.
Indeed, indeed. The Ramayan's cultural and religious rootedness is in Vedic India, but its ethical essence is universal.
Absolutely.
Do you think this attribute of this epic is evident to those outside India? You know because you have studied it.
Right. So what I've seen over the years, now, it's been many, many years. There's my mission, if you could say. I mean, I get invited to speak at scholarly conferences. For example, the World Ramayana Conference in Jabalpur. Every 3 years I speak there. I speak at other conferences. People cast me as an academic, and I can work on that level, but I'm really a producer. My mission has been to bring the Ramayana to the West, to open up the doorways of perception of Western listeners. By the way, one of the reasons I do audio productions is not only because of my visual impairment. The Vedic knowledge, the Vedas and Vedic knowledge, were originally an oral tradition. They were always passed down pundit to pundit. So part of it comes from a limitation in me, but the deeper impulse is to preserve the essential oral tradition of Vedic knowledge.
Oh yeah, that's true. I mean, the oral part is something that I'm sure baffles a lot of people outside India, because historically it's all right up to the Bhakti movement, which is, you're talking about 500-600 years ago. Oral traditions were everything in India.
Exactly.
So written material is hard to come by.
Exactly, and that's why these critical translations of the Ramayana by Professor Goldman at University of Berkeley, which they've created these critical editions. It's hard to piece together what was the original manuscript. But let me go back to what your question is: the receptivity in the West to the Ramayana and its values. That's been my mission, and I feel like I'm making good headway. For example, it's well known that George Lucas was strongly influenced by Joseph Campbell. In creating Star Wars was based, if you look at the storyline, it's a conglomerate of the Mahabharata and the Ramayana.
It's been pointed out, yes.
It's been pointed, it's well known, this is not esoteric.
Yeah.
And, Joseph Campbell and this archetypal perspective on myth has influenced so many filmmakers. So these archetypal values have slowly infiltrated into society. And I point out over and over again in my presentations that, first of all, the Ramayana was Valmiki was the Atikavya, the first poet. It was the first great epic. So many of the themes that are in the Ramayana that are seminal to Western literature come from the Ramayana. Where was the first exile to the forest? Where was the evil stepmother? Where was the betrayals, the journey into the forest, some of these monsters, the battles between good and evil? We forget that the Ramayana was the first great epic. It was the first heroic quest. And it's because of that. And that's what I stress over and over again. It's the first heroic quest. So we have to look back to find some of these. And the Odyssey, I've done presentations with an Odyssey scholar and myself. The Odyssey is one little chapter in the Ramayana. So many elements that are parallel.
One of the striking features for me, both in the Mahabharata as well as the Ramayana, are fantastic names. Forget everything else. Forget the plot lines. Forget the profundity of the themes. Just the names. I mean, say it's a name like Yudhishthir from the Mahabharata. Yeah. Or even in Jatayu, you mentioned Jatayu. Now, what such interesting names. That alone to me is something that requires scholarly attention. What kind of...
Kumbhakarna is another good name.
There you go.
Indrajit.
Yeah. Now tell me, do you have any favorite sound from among these names?
Well, that was, by the way, the real challenge in the recording. By the way, because if you listened for Westerners, one thing I'm very proud of for Westerners on my original Ramayana production, our pronunciation is pretty darn good. Yeah. Not as good. It'll never be as good as an Indian pronouncing it because we just don't have the phonetic structure in our mouths. But there's nothing. We got coaching, and Richard Ross on Volume 1 did an excellent job because he was steeped in Vedic knowledge. Stephen is the best actor of the three of us. Boy, did I have to coach him on the pronunciation, but he eventually got it to a good extent. And it's something that I've studied for a long time. But just saying the names and getting them right. Sometimes there'd be a long list of names, like the names of 20 trees in a row. And if you blow one, we'd have to do a retake.
Exactly. No, this really, I mean, I'm just thinking about it, I feel tired. That it is so much work.
Well, no kidding. I mean, Mike, let me tell you about one of the biggest challenges when you're doing a project this long. Sometimes there would be a minor character that would appear once and then not until 3 months later in the recording process. How do we remember to do the exact same voice for that character?
Yeah, that's a fascinating challenge.
Yeah.
I sincerely hope this becomes a worldwide phenomenon because you've done an extraordinary job. And my compliments to your team. It's quite remarkable. 75 hours of recording of the Ramayana.
Yeah,
is quite astonishing.
And now it's available as a digital download. It takes literally, it's about 4 gigabytes. But I remember when we first came out of it, people get 4 gigabytes. How can we handle a 4 gigabyte download? Now it downloads in 5 minutes.
Exactly.
In their media player, and they can play it out perfectly. And it costs a third of what it did when I first released it.
Exactly. To digress a bit, now that AI is everywhere, are you planning to use AI to somehow upgrade what you've done, or you're done with Ramayana on your project?
I was just in Kauai, Hawaii, and I don't know if you're aware of the famous Hindu temple in Kauai.
I am.
And I visited. It's extraordinary, absolutely beautiful. And I met with their director of communications. I forgot his name right now. A Swami, a Western Swami, very knowledgeable, very deep guy. And their guru, who founded their temple, who's now passed, they had asked, he wrote extraordinary books, and they wanted to recapture his books in his voice. And they did a few of them before he passed. He passed already 20, 30 years ago. They're using, now that they have a record of his voice, they're using AI to recreate his exact voice for the materials that he had never recorded. And he played me the two. I could not tell the difference, and I have good ears. And he was trying to explain to me that I can now use this to apply to do my next projects. I don't think that's my thing, personally. I've now, as you've seen, after releasing the Ramayana in 2004, it was such an extraordinary journey, a real hero's quest to even complete that. I didn't know what to do with myself after a while, after I finished that. It was like, and it got a lot of attention and awards, and a lot of people purchased it. Many university libraries purchased it for their collections. They felt obligated because it was the full unabridged Ramayana in oral form. But I began a few years later, I realized as people can barely, now human beings apparently have a shorter attention span than goldfish. That's research. I'm not making it up. It's actually research.
No, it is true.
So I began to do distillations. And maybe you noticed, and I thought I should bring out these shorter distillations on the three main characters of the Ramayana. So in 2014, I decided the Ramayana is a textbook in discriminating Dharma, finer and finer levels of Dharma. That's one of its aspects. One of its profound aspects is because it's an exercise. There's so many challenging gray area scenes in the Ramayana, like when Ram slays Vali, when Bharat Milap, when Bharat goes back into the forest to retrieve Ram. And then they're having these dialogues, and Bharat is right. Ram should go home. But then Ram, at the end, with the subtlest logic, makes Bharat realize that he has to continue his commitment and the promise that he had made to his father Dasharatha. Same thing with Vali. When Vali is dying on the battlefield, Vali appeals to Ram, explaining why. How could you slay me like an assassin from the back? That was wrong action. And Ram carefully takes him through this beautiful dialogue where you realize that Vali did not deserve protection of Dharma because he had taken his brother's wife while he was still alive. So he did not deserve the protection of Dharma. He couldn't invoke Dharma to protect him. So those are examples. So you're discriminating finer and finer levels of Dharma. And I realized how powerful that would be to bring out those values. So I created this Ram's Dharma, Leadership Secrets of the Ultimate Warrior Sage Prince, which was released in 2014. And at that time, I was trying to bring it out to the business community because I thought at that time there was a reissuing or republication of Leadership Secrets from Attila the Hun, which became a bestseller. I don't know if you remember that.
Right.
Leadership Secrets of Attila the Hun. I go, if all these business people are buying up a leadership book by Attila the Hun, who is an incredible barbarian and killer, maybe there'll be some receptivity in the West to Leadership Secrets from Ram. And
you can churn that out. That's a fascinating idea.
So, it was released. This is a 2-hour. So this is one of my shorter ones, 2 hours, going through 25 core principles of ideal leadership extracted from the Ramayana, particularly from Bala Anuyogya Kanda.
In my years of interaction with friends in the West, especially in the US, a thing that throws them off a bit about Indian epics, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, is its very stark situational logic. There is no overarching morality in the Indian context. Morality is a shifting idea. I'll give you a simple example. To the extent that even in popular Hindi movies, the idea of situational logic has percolated. There was a movie some time ago where the villain tells the hero that you have to kill so and so. So the hero says, "How can I kill him? He saved my life." He's troubled by the order that the villain gives him. So the villain replies that he saved your life was in its own place. Now you have to take his life. Has its own place. The situational logic of that is everywhere across, both in the Mahabharata and
I think that shows the sophistication of Indian tradition and culture because, and this is the key thing when we look at our world today, is every businessman knows that. That's why I brought it up for businessmen. Every political leader knows this. Every mother knows this. There's so much nuance in the way we need to live from a high level of integrity in Dharma. And there's so many gray areas, and the classic archetypal advantage of that is right in the Mahabharata. When Arjuna is standing on the battlefield at Kurukshetra, in suspension between his heart and his mind, people characterize him as weak, and he will not fight. No, he wasn't weak. He was at the pinnacle of development in his heart, and the pinnacle of development in his mind. And he looked at the situation, and he said, either I uphold righteousness, on the other hand, I kill my family members. and he was a suspension. He could not act. I think Indian literature, the Vedic literature, is filled with these, mainly because that's really the reality of life. Sometimes it's just not black and white. And what I realized in all my work, and this, everyone wants to know, what does this mean? What does this part of the Ramayana mean? What is it? When did it happen? They want to know the details, who, what, when. For me, this is the key shift. The Ramayana, Mahabharata, especially because they're itihasa.
Right.
It's process oriented. We evolve as we read and listen to the Ramayana and Mahabharata. We refine our discrimination. We refine our sense of Dharma. We learn to distinguish between right and wrong and all the subtle nuances. That is what it's cultured. That's a process oriented thing. Ultimately, there is no definitive answer of what it means.
Exactly.
It's what it means to you as you go through it.
You know, this is counterintuitive to a lot of people in the West who are raised in the Judeo-Christian traditions, where black and white is pretty sharply defined. Sins are pretty sharply defined. In the Indian context, it is so amorphous. There is back and forth between all of these feelings. I mean, you mentioned Arjun and Krishna.
Right.
Gita is such a fantastic example of the situational logic that I was just mentioning.
I quote it all the time, even because I think it's just classic. But
Right.
Ramayana is filled with it as well. Look at Dasharatha when he promises his 2 boons to Kaikeyi, and she calls him on these 2 boons, and he loves his son more than he loves his own life, but yet he has to exile. Oh my God! See, this play of opposites. This play of opposites is key. It's Dvandva in Sanskrit. This play of opposites is the whole nature of this evolutionary process.
Right.
And then you see Dasharatha torn between his love for his son and as the king, he must uphold his word. And that process that's pulling, like Arjuna being pulled, like Dasharatha being pulled, like Ram being pulled. Of course, his treatment of Sita is we're constantly working through. And the reason why I think this is so common in Indian knowledge, the Vedic tradition, is because it purifies our hearts and minds.
Right.
It moves us in the direction of wholeness. That's the key.
How did you first react when you became aware of what we are talking about, this kind of situational logic? I'm sure as you read, you realized that this is very different.
Well, I had a cognition, I guess you could call it. I feel, first of all, I also feel a great affinity towards Valmiki. Mm-hmm. I always felt like whenever I would look at a picture of Valmiki or whatever they create for Valmiki, it feels like my father.
Oh,
and I'm very devoted to Valmiki. And that's why everyone asks, why don't you work with the Tulsidas Ramayana? I go, no, I'm just Valmiki. This is the original. But when I was in graduate school, I was fascinated with the structure of myth. Now, I know many Indians object to the word myth because that means something fanciful that didn't really happen. And they object when I apply the word myth to Mahabharata or Ramayana. But if they hear my definition of myth, then they usually accept. And my definition of myth is the one that Joseph Campbell or the great other mythologist Mircea Eliade said, that the myth is the sum total of all the cultural values and stories. It's the essence of how creation became created. And the massive cultural, ethical origin stories of a culture is its myth. And when you define it like that, people go, okay, yeah, I can accept that that's what you mean by myth. And that's what Joseph Campbell did.
Right.
Later, when we grew up and we went to high school and the story, we listened to the Roman and Greek gods, and those were myths because they were stories. They didn't really happen. But, that's what itihasa. Itihasa has both its historical reality and it has its subtler, symbolic, metaphorical, evolutionary values.
There are 7 kands in the Ramayana. Which one is your favorite?
That's a really good question, Mayank. Actually, I'll give you my answer. I can give you my
Okay.
answer. And this will surprise you and probably most people. It's Uttarakhanda.
Okay.
Now, there's a lot of debate whether was Uttarakhanda part of Valmiki's original cognition. There's some evidence that suggests that it was written in a different style and it was added later by later moralists. Personally, the story is not complete if you just finish at the end of Yuddhakanda when
Right.
they return home triumphantly and they're Rama's crowned king. The whole powerful transcendental value, the transcendental value that takes you to higher states of consciousness, happens in Uttarakhanda. Without Uttarakhanda, it's just they lived happily ever after. And usually things don't work that way. This is the subtlest transformational value of Vedanta. Uttarakhanda is Vedanta. In fact, I gave a talk once on the Vedanta of the Ramayana because I realized I felt like I've completed so many things, from my mega production, I call my opus of the complete unabridged Ramayana, my theatrical productions of the Ramayana, I've done 2 or 3 of those. I built a theme park based on the Ramayana.
Wow.
I've done many scholarly articles and so on. I've consulted with the Sagar family on some of their productions. I wondered what else to do, so I gave a talk on the Vedanta of the Ramayana. So that's my favorite, is taking us to this transcendental value of letting the smallness of the relative behind and ascending to the fullness of the absolute. That's what happens in Uttarakhand.
True. Would it make a difference to you if Uttarakhand wasn't written by Valmiki?
I'll let the scholars decide that, but for me personally, it completes the whole story. So, and my intimate feeling is it was included. If Valmiki didn't write it, well, for example, many people feel that Tulsidas was a later incarnation of Valmiki. Maybe one of the authors who finished Uttarakhanda was, I'm sure Valmiki has had many incarnations. But now, as I said, I'm focused more on trying to, that first one in 2014, the Ram's Dharma. Later, I taught a course for the Neem Karoli Baba Ashram in Taos, New Mexico at the end of COVID. Now here's an example of showing the receptivity in the West. They had never offered an online course. One of their board members had purchased my Ramayana. She said, Michael would be a good person to teach this course. We created a 7-lesson online course on the Ramayana. And I pulled together everything. This was in 2021. I pulled together 30 years of my material and taught just really deep course on the Ramayana. It's available online. And we expected 100 people would register. Over 1,000 registered, and we turned 600 away because we only had a Zoom license for 1,000.
I see.
These are almost all Westerners.
Really?
So that's an example of the receptivity.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah. In fact, that was my next question. You already answered it. So a lot of non-Indians are drawn to this.
Yes. There was Indians involved because Neem Karoli
Sure.
Baba Ashram has many Indian followers. Neem Karoli Baba, who
Right.
was Ram Das's teacher. But from that, by the way, they invited kirtan singers to kind of sing at the end, Krishna Das being one of them, who's the most popular kirtan singer in the world right now. And we ended up, I just pitched him on the idea, let's do a project together on Hanuman, because all the Neem Karoli Baba people are real devotees of Hanuman.
Right.
So we collaborated on this project where I pulled out almost every passage featuring Hanuman from the Valmiki Ramayana. And then Krishna Das and I wove them together with our commentary, and Krishna Das sings. And that one was Hanuman's Leap of Faith. That's an 8-hour production that I released in 2022. And once again, I went and I used the original clips. I repurposed the original clips from my original audio Ramayana. But we wove it together with modern commentary, just commenting on what was really happening. And that's what I mean by distillation. It guides you through the story. Anyone, even if you don't know Hanuman that well, it's accessible because you listen to the Ramayana, and it's original or audio from the original Valmiki Ramayana, and then you hear a commentary giving context for what this means, where does it taking us, and of course I bring out this evolutionary value of being in process with it.
Right.
I'm bringing these up just so you get a flavor for how I've been evolving this in terms of its accessibility and the way I'm orienting the knowledge for Westerners to enjoy. A lot of Indians are, they've been really into this as well. It's there's a lot of Indians of the diaspora in English-speaking countries. I get orders from Australia, UK, US, Canada.
I see. No, that's good to know. There are fantastic characters in the Ramayana, any number of them. But if you were to boil it down, you're looking at essentially four great characters. One is, of course, Maryada Purushottam Sri Ram, as he's described, the ultimate in restraint and moral rectitude. He's not flamboyant like Krishna, for instance. Krishna has a different kind of following. Yeah, go
He's
ahead.
straight. He's got a straight arrow. He's a straight arrow.
Exactly. So it is Ram. Then you have, interestingly, Hanuman. What a character. Then you have Ravan. And then you have Sita. These are the four grandees of the Ramayana.
Exactly.
Of course, there is so much more to it. But I'm saying, in terms of giving you hooks, which was your most important hook? How did you look at, say, someone like Ravan, for instance?
Well, I'll come to Ravana. Let me go to the first part of your question. I've been a Ram devotee for 30 years. Everything is Ram, 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 Ram.
Okay.
Maryada Purushottam Ram. Ram, Ram, Paramaratma. This was my thing. And the reason I brought up that course from the Neem Karoli Baba Ashram, one of the directors there, they invited me out and he said, Michael, I know you love Ram, but we're all about Hanuman. You need to do a program on Hanuman. And I said, my main focus, I'm just devoted to Ram. And then one of the students there said, Michael, if you're devoted to Ram, then you know all about Hanuman. And I go, wow, they're right. So that's how Hanuman took birth. And one of the reasons, Mayank, I do projects, I learn through my own projects. Meaning, when I did that Hanuman's Leap of Faith project, the purpose for me personally is the imbibing the qualities of Hanuman. You move in the direction of embodying Hanuman. I've done that for years with Ram. But the one that was in the back of my mind all this time, and this is the one actually that I'm most excited about, it seems that we waited till now to talk about it, is Sita. Sita, there was some lack of familiarity with her, but deep in the background, I had a beautiful relationship with my mother who passed away very young, when I was young. But the feminine energy, the divine feminine and goddesses, I always have a deep longing for that in me. And so even though I did the whole Ramayana first, and then the first distillation was Ram's Dharma, the second distillation was Hanuman, Sita, even though she's come last, except for Ravana, we'll come to that in a second, was the one that was really most dear to my heart. And this one, I knew I could not be the commentator. There was no way for a man to be the commentator on Sita. And this was just a few years ago. I went to India, and the Sagar family arranged a meeting for me with Deepika Tapiwala, who played Sita in the original Ramanand Sagar production. Of course, I had a crush on her, back from the first time I ever saw it in '89, and just to meet her now, and she gave the blessings to the project. I almost tried to invite her to be one of the readers on it, and she agreed, but it ended up not working out. But since then, I began to recruit these women wisdom leaders, and including Nina Rao, who is Krishna Das's musical partner, extraordinary kirtani in her own right. The Mirabai Starr, who's a well-known author, who's written many books like on Saint Teresa, many of the women's saints, Christian and mystic, she writes on them, but she's also done on Acharya Shunya, who's written Roar Like a Goddess. She's in the lineage of Ayodhya, from Ayodhya, as a Vedic priest from Ayodhya. And then the big coup was to get Vandana Shiva, who's one of the world's most famous environmental. And it went on and on, the people. And Chitradeva Karuni, the famous novelist who wrote Forest of Enchantment and Palace of Illusions on Ramayana and Mahabharata. Those are the commentators. Then I realized wow, I wanted to use the original audio from my original, just like I did on the Hanuman project. I realized I cannot have a man reading Sita's voice. So I had to re-record all the passages that we use. We pulled out 24 of these passages from Sita. And I hired some young women. I tried to get some very famous celebrities, but ended up getting some young actresses to do, once again, all the parts. 3 of them, there was 24 passages. Each of them read 8. So it's, once again, a beautiful interweaving of original passages from Valmiki Ramayana, read by women's voices, and then commentary by these 12 women wisdom leaders. That's absolutely beautiful. You know, you can hear about it at sitasgems.com.
Yeah, I heard a bit of that.
Yeah, and it's just, it's a very attractive landing page, a website, and then you can listen to some of the clips. But this one, this just came out in December. This is hot off the press.
Right.
And I feel, of all the projects I've done, you see, Sita is very much misunderstood. Her role in the Ramayana is very misunderstood. She's cast as the victim, weak and submissive, and those role models, that perception of her role model, I think, has done very destructive in Indian consciousness. And here's the key, Mike. This was not a modern, I didn't change it. I didn't change the original Valmiki text. When I pulled out those 24 passages, I stayed true to the original. But when you pull them out, like Sita's passages are only 10% of the Ramayana. When you pull them out and they stand on their own, and you listen to them in sequence, you realize Sita is an extraordinarily powerful character. She has power, the power of her word, her sense of Dharma. She's not in conflict. She has such resilience and strength and inner conviction, and power and subtlety. And she may be the active ingredient that propels the whole storyline all along. Hardly anyone has done this. People have done many treatments of Ram and Hanuman. But to do this for Sita, I feel this is truly empowering to women, Indian women, Western women. And I'm getting beautiful feedback from people. People are just finishing it now. This one is 9.5 hours. And also there's some music. Christian Das has contributed music, as well as Nina Rao, saying, I struggled so much with the Ramayana. Now I can accept it. And that's extremely gratifying.
Yeah.
Let me just, one more thing is, they had this love and devotion for Ram, but they could not accept Ram's treatment of Sita. And,
True.
And the way it's framed, when you really realize what actually happened in the original text, people are coming to peace. They can have their love for Ram, and they can understand the deeper mechanics of how it happened. They accept, and then they can extol Ram and Sita. There's no Ram, we're not trying to beat up Ram in this production, Sita's Gems. Glorifying Ram and glorifying Sita.
Right. We will, of course, do perhaps a separate one on your other interests, like Vedic psychology and transcendental meditation. That's a whole different area. We'll set it up different times. But, I wanted mainly to focus on your Ramayana project, and I'm glad we got to do it.
This is what I learned from my knowledge as a TM meditator. I've been doing TM, transcendental meditation, for 50 years now, since I was a teenager. Is people talk about this deep state. There is no deep state. You know what there is? There's a shallow state. There's a shallow state. People operating from these very shallow levels of laws of nature. That's the threat, is the shallow state, not the deep state. I want the deep state. I want people to operate from these deeper laws of nature, like Krishna informed Oppenheimer. So, Mayank, I really appreciate you having me here. I hope that some of your listeners will share and take a look at some of these productions.
They certainly will. In fact, a lot of them were quite excited when I announced you on Facebook. A lot of them didn't know about this. So this is going to help them reach out to your site and maybe start downloading what you produced.
Can I mention the sites, or are you going to just put it
Please,
up?
no, please do it. I'll do it, of course.
So the most recent one is sitasgems.com. The one on Hanuman is hanumansleapoffaith.com. And the website, my main website, which includes all the programs, is the original one on the 75-hour long Ramayana, is ramayanaudio.com.